The calculations and hierarchies that we've created previously are going to be used largely for labels, columns, rows, and filters. Now we're going to move into measures, and measures are formulas that are created specifically for use in the values area. They're actually our Power Pivot data that we are summarizing. Measures that we use all the time are things like sum, average, min, max, count numbers, and so on. You can also create your own formulas using DAX if you wish. And normally, we create these in a pivot table by simply adding something to the values. So, for example, if I go to sales and say I'd like to see what our net sales amount is, and click, this doesn't say net sales amount, it says sum of net sales amount. This is what's called an implicit measure. By adding data to the table, as opposed to labels, we create a measure, but it's fleeting. It only exists during the time that we're actually using it in this table. If I remove this, it's gone, and it doesn't exist anymore. But these implicit measures are created in memory, and they're one way we can do this. However, if we have measures we want to use all the time, it behooves us to create them so that they're persistent and so that they appear as choices that our users can select. Let's create some explicit measures in our sales table. Here we are in sales, and we create measures in the calculation area. If it's not displayed, simply click the calculation area button. Every measure begins with a name, and it has three parts. We start with a name, and then we say that we want to calculate. We can't simply throw a column in there in the same way that we did in the pivot table layout grid just now. We actually have to say we're going to calculate, and then we're going to provide some kind of a calculation expression, usually sum, average, one of the aggregate functions. So what we're going to do is create 4 different measures that measure the sales in each of the 4 different channels that we have. So we have a channel for stores, for online, for catalog, and for reseller, and we're going to create 4 different measures. Let's first do online sales. So begin by clicking in the first space available in this cell in the calculation area. Doesn't matter what the column above it is. And we're going to start typing the name, and it's going to be online sales, followed by a colon. That's easy to forget, but the colon says that this is a name. And we will then type an equals because every formula starts with an equals, and we will start to type our function name, which is calculate. Hit tab to enter, and then begin to enter our expression. And notice the syntax here. We're seeing this as a screen tip, that the calculate function allows for an expression and then for multiple optional filters. So I'm going to type the expression sum, and I want our column name, and I know that to enter a column name, I need to start with the open bracket, and the column name that I want is net sales amount. Simply hit the letter N, and I'll grab it, and I'm going to close the parentheses now. So the sum function here that I'm using in DAX has to have its parentheses closed, just as it would if I were elsewhere in an Excel workbook. And then my filter, comma, is that in the channel table, notice that here's the channel table with a T on it. The channel name, tab, is equal to, and in quotes, precisely type online. And now I need to close off the calculate function by entering another parentheses. Now, what if I don't? If I don't, it will tell me this expression's not valid. I can click OK, and it will give me no real help. It's pointing to the 2 functions and saying, I don't know where these end. So we'll go ahead and enter our last parentheses here. Press enter. We're done. There's our online sales, and it actually is calculating and giving us a total. If we widen this column, we'll be able to see it. There's our online sales. I'd actually like the format for this to be at least the comma format. I could also say currency if I wanted to do that with our $sign. There we go. So that's how we're going to format that. Now let's add our retail sales. which are store sales. Store is the name of the channel for a retail. So store sales, colon, equals, same thing. Calculate, sum, column name, net sales amount, close that expression right there with your close parens, comma, filter 1. In the channel table, the channel name is equal to store. Close parentheses to close the calculate function. Press enter. There are our store sales. We'll format this as well. So this is how we create measures. We enter expressions. We can enter sums, averages, or any other type of an expression that we want to be able to use to create a measure. Our next move would be to create the other two measures for our catalog sales and our reseller sales. Let's assume that we're going to do that. I'd like to return you to the pivot table so that we can see what this looks like. Remembering that our sales table now has online sales. When I click, they're automatically added here to values. As I said, measures end up in the value section. And if I wanted to do something to arrange these, for example, by date, there are my online sales, and here are my dates. And I can use this hierarchy in order to explore these sales. Let's add our store sales, just like that. It's absolutely a thing of beauty. So here we have the ability to create a formula and to have it persist in our pivot table because we created it using Power Pivot. Welcome to measures. Hierarchy is a system that is designed to help us organize our data into a logical structure. We have geographic data in our data model, and if we think about the highest level of geography in our model, we might think of the whole world. But inside of the world, the first layer that we actually look at is a country. And within a country, we have states. And within states, we might have counties, and within counties, we can have cities. So this is what that hierarchy would look like. Countries or nations with states or provinces, and counties or some other type of organization, and then towns, townships, and so on. So if we look at this as a geography hierarchy, what we could do is say that the members of our hierarchy are countries, states, counties, and then cities, or our local political unit. If we're only using mailing and shipping information, we might not have counties in it at all. It might just be countries, states, and zip codes, for example. This is what a geographic hierarchy looks like. Now, we have other hierarchies in our data as well. We just got done adding some product columns using the related function because we have a hierarchy there as well. We have categories, and within those categories, we have subcategories, and within the subcategories, we have products. So, for example, we have a category for computers and subcategories for printers and specific printers. We have another subcategory of computer accessories, and there we have things like mice and touchpads. So here is another hierarchy. And as long as we build this hierarchy in, it's very easy for our users to be able to use it. They can grab the whole product hierarchy and not worry, oh, did I get subcategory? Did I get product? We'll treat it as one organizing method. And finally, you'll find date hierarchies to be incredibly useful every place that we create Power Pivots. We have years, for example, and within the years we have quarters, and within the quarters we have months. And this is an organizational method, whether we're talking about sales data, accounting data, information from HR, doesn't really matter. Within a year, we have quarters, and within those quarters, we have months. It might be that our quarter starts on July 1st because we're a state government, for example. That's okay. It just means that we have different specific items within that date hierarchy. And we may have parallel date hierarchies. We might have years and quarters and months. We might also have years and quarters and weeks. And the most granular choice then, of course, is on what specific day a person was hired or a sale was made. So this is how we think about hierarchies, ways to organize our data. And you can also think of hierarchies as things that we can expand. We can start with a year and then expand it so we show the quarters, expand the second quarter so that we see April, May, and June. Or that we're allowed to roll information up, that we have January, February, and March sales data that we roll up to quarter one, and we roll the 4 quarters up into the year. Let's see how we can create hierarchies within our data model so that it's easy for our users to work with these sets of structured data. I've opened the hierarchy workbook, which you'll find in the exercise files in the Chapter 5 folder, and I'm in diagram view because hierarchies are very similar to relationships. They're like relationships within a particular table rather than between tables. So you will always be creating and working with hierarchies here in diagram view. Let's start first with our products. So here's the product table. I'd like to make this a little bit bigger so that I can actually see it. And when I point to the table, there are 2 buttons at the top. One is a maximize button, and that will make this very easy to see if I wish. You can then restore it back to the same size. But the other button is the one we want, and it's create hierarchy. And it will create a new hierarchy at the bottom of the list. It will name it Hierarchy 1, and we're actually going to call this categories because this is going to be about our product categories. So the first thing that we'll drag into our hierarchy is the category, which we added as a related column. Good idea to do that. Now below that, I'll put the subcategory. Now I want to go get product name, and it's a long way from here all the way down to the bottom, but the hierarchy already exists. I can right-click and say Add to Hierarchy, Categories, and then I'm just going to scroll down and make sure that it ended up put at the very bottom. Now, I can also rename items in here, so I could change this from product category within this hierarchy to just be the category. I can rename product subcategory to just be subcategory and product name to just be product. Why would I do this? I do this because it's easier for my users. There's no reason to have a shorter name. Shorter isn't necessarily better, but a name that my users more easily recognize that within categories. We have categories, subcategories, and products. You and I understand that. They'll understand that. So that works just fine. Let's take a look now at our hierarchy for dates. Another way I can do this is I can choose the items in order. I can choose my calendar year, hold Control to select things that aren't next to each other, like quarter, month, and finally, full date label is actually the date. Right-click, Create Hierarchy. Here we are at the bottom, Hierarchy 1. They appear in the order in which I selected them, and I'm going to call this Dates. Now I can change these names as well. Right-click, Rename, Year, Rename. There's even a benefit to putting in something like QTR because I'm going to use this later on in reports. And it would just be great if something that was over simply the number 1, 2, 3, or 4 wasn't a great big word. This is month. And this is actually the day or the date. Now my table's also called dates, and this is called date. So I think I'm going to actually rename this to be day. If I wanted to say what day of the week it was, I could use weekday. That's great. And one more. Our other hierarchy we want to see is in geography. So we have continents, we have regions, we have states, we have cities. So 1, 2, 3, 4, right-click, Create Hierarchy. And I'm going to call this Geo Group, Continent, Region, State, City. So if I want to change these again, remember that I can and make it easy. Continent. Region Country is a little more interesting. It's Region Country Name because it can be either. Rename this one to be State Prov or State or Province. And rename City Name to City. This looks great. How does this work then? Well, if I create a new pivot table right now with my newly revised data model, and I say that I'd like to work with dates, notice that I actually have right here a hierarchy called dates that I can add. And within my dates, it expands to quarters. Within quarters, it expands to specific months and then specific dates. That's pretty wicked. So this is how the dates work. If I say that I'd like to see products, Notice that first I can put in my categories. Audio, we saw this earlier, there are my products. So this is how this works. An entire collapsible structure for being able to work with and analyze our data, report on it, and be able to understand exactly how one piece of data is related to another structurally. Simply by using our Power Pivot tool to be able to create a model that includes hierarchies, we make reporting in pivot tables, reporting in pivot charts, and reporting in other visualization tools much, much easier for our users.